All right, good evening. I will call the Capital Planning Committee to order for Monday, April 13th, 2020, 6:30 p.m. All members are present except for Ms. Cook, who I am expecting. I'm just going to read the short statement that I'm required to read at the beginning of the meeting, and then we'll get into the items. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, in the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting in the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information in the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at https://www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so by the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we're unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after this meeting. All right. So our first agenda item is going to be the approval of meeting minutes from April 1, 2020. Does anyone have any questions or comments or changes on the minutes drafted by Mrs. Hale?
I do not.
All right. I'm not seeing or hearing anything other than Lisa's, so I'm going to move that we accept the meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Ratio I.
Palmer, aye.
Bath, aye.
Mark, aye.
All right, passes unanimously. Given that Jeff will be the one drafting at least tonight's minutes, and then if he can rally enough support to help him at future meetings, just one procedural item is, I know every committee kind of does it differently in terms of meeting minutes, et cetera. But if we do have a member drafting minutes and sending them out, just a reminder that open meeting law does not allow us to reply back to that member and offer our comments. So until I can think of a better system that fully complies, I just ask that people, no matter how small your changes may be, just bring them to the meeting. We'll just try to hash them out pretty quickly at the beginning of a meeting. Hopefully with the meetings being all recorded, there won't be that many changes or anything like that, but I think it's very important the meeting minutes not be discussed kind of outside of the setting. And we'll just take whatever version is submitted by whoever's drafting them for that meeting and then act on them in this manner. Any questions on that?
So is the plan for me to distribute these several days in advance of the next meeting?
Yeah, I mean, typically the quicker you can do them after the meeting, the better they typically are.
Sure.
So like Jeff, just theoretically, if you did them tomorrow, you can submit them to the group capital planning, you can send them to me and I can distribute them. Either way works.
Okay.
But yeah, I would assume everyone, I mean, I got these ones Friday, but obviously Vanessa's been doing 1,000 other things, normally probably a little sooner than that.
Okay.
All right. So what I wanted to do very quickly is, as you all saw and received a link, we've set up a share drive on the town's account that this committee has access to. Everyone has read-only access so that there's no editing of documents, exchange of information. It's really just meant to be a central repository of all of the documents we're getting for our meetings, given that there will be many iterations of capital plans, version changes, et cetera. Not to mention other things that we're going to collect from other members of the public. Obviously, any document we reference in our meeting will then be submitted to the town clerk's office for posting with our minutes. But I just wanted to review what I was able to gather, and thank you to Brian, Mark, and the entire team for gathering a lot of this data. But I just wanted to make sure everyone kind of understands how we've been laying it out. All of these documents won't necessarily be used in tonight's meeting, but I wanted to give you an idea of what we're gathering so that you can then peruse around as your time allows. So there's a few folders. All right, I guess we're going to reconvene virtually. It's now 6:46. We were starting, I was giving an overview of item 3 and we lost our feed. So I'll just restart with what I was saying. There was no discussion amongst any other member during that time. So on item 3, I just figured I'd give an outline of this folder that's been shared with committee members. This is where there'll be read-only access to all data that's going to be used for a meeting, but it'll also be used as a repository to store different versions over time in case you need to compare back. What I found in talking to Brian and Mark and just knowing that we're going to have multiple versions and trying to put our mind together of how we can comply with open meeting law, but at the same time, not spend half of a meeting trying to reconcile versions and really just focus on the content of what's in here. I mean, each meeting was really important to me to streamline the meeting. So what I'm going to do is just go through the folders here so that everyone understands what's here and what will go in here. Obviously, there will be new folders over time. And I'll likely just summarize each of these items each meeting, but also I think you all received an email saying what got posted as well. But in the asset listings, you'll find the current listing of vehicles and facilities. This is based on what we report to the town's insurance. So basically everything that's insured. The capital plan, this is the capital plan as of the end of March. It does not reflect the updates that Brian said were in flight at our last meeting. I'll let him provide an update on when he thinks he'll have a new version tonight. But I wanted to kind of get an existing version for us to start thinking through how best to approach the next steps. The debt schedules, I believe this was a request from someone at some point during the last meeting. This shows all the current debt. So basically all the assets that have debt associated with them and the runoff of the various payments. You'll see depending upon the asset, it goes a different length. Under school data, I know there was reference, I believe it was by Kathy in the last meeting, to the school study that was done in and around 2013. I was able to get a copy of that and I posted it here. I intend no discussion on that tonight, but it is a longer read that I wanted to get everyone access to sooner rather than later, because I think it will be relevant to the conversation with the schools when we get there. And then the actual next item on our agenda is the 5-year estimate. So this was really meant to be for particularly Joe and Jeff, who haven't sat on, aren't sitting on advisory BOS or haven't been in my spot over the last couple of years, trying to understand what the levy capacity is. So with that, maybe I'll just go to item 4 on our agenda, is maybe just have Brian walk through the 5-year projection of levy capacity that is posted currently. This is obviously prior to whatever the town decides to do in reaction to COVID-19, both from revenue streams and expenses. But this was what the Board of Selectmen were working with up until current situation came upon us. And I think it's important just for all members to kind of understand where the pain points are, like what the upcoming years look like prior to us undertaking any sort of meaningful action or recommendations, because I think that will be important to the timing of some discussions that we have here. So with that, maybe I'll pause and turn it to Brian. If anyone wants me to share it, I certainly can, but if you all have it on your own screens, I'm not bringing up the big board here, but open to thoughts if everyone has it. And if Brian, if you're ready to kind of take us quickly through kind of what the story tells us and where the pain points are and why those pain points are where they are.
Sure. So you may have gotten a chance to look at the sheet that was in the shared drive, and I won't get into the granular detail of it. Just to to say that on a high level, if you look at the top it's the revenues. If you look at the bottom, it's the expenses. Obviously, there's a formula for the town each year to have a levy capacity. And it's basically your levy from the prior year times 2.5%. But it's also plus exempted debt, which is capital, which you have direct, this committee will have some input to. And it has some other aspects to it that can contract or expand the levy to a certain extent. So that's basically the amount that you're allowed to spend. And then you have certain things like as fees and revenue the town collects that you can add on to that. And then the bottom half is obviously our operating budgets, including the school and capital benefits, all the big items that we do every year to support the town operations. So when you look at that sheet, Jason is correct. I've actually been working on an updated one that's in response to the latest month or so of bad news. And Lisa will probably be the first one to, or Mark and Lisa will be the first ones to see the updated list pretty soon. Those 2 years that you see on the list, FY24 and FY26 to be specific, they are now in the red, probably a couple $100,000 each, because the revenues that we have to adjust for this event, unfortunately, are going to trickle down to those years and tip them over. So I think why this is important for the capital committee in particular is, the planning aspect of your committee and the recommendations you make are going to be, how can we fit some of these projects into the schedule where we can actually afford them? And, if you look at those 2 years, they're problematic specifically. So typically, unfortunately, things don't always move in a straight line or a gradual line. And usually it tends to be capital that actually is the culprit of that. Once in a while, we'll get the school department or the town budgets that, spike up for whatever reason and cause an issue, especially on the school side. If the K-8 budget goes up 6%, that's a problem because of the amount of their budget. But typically, it's capital that kind of has those spikes and up and down wave effects. So as you go through it, you'll get more comfortable looking at the data, and you'll see how certain years have certain projects in them, whether they're starting or ending or whatever that affect this schedule. So those are the 2 years I'd just like to point out. They're kind of obvious that they're problematic years. The other years are tough in a general sense. I feel like I'm always giving bad news to the selectmen that these are tough years. I don't remember many years I've been given good news, but as you go through the data and look at the capital plan, just keep in mind that those 2 years are tough. And if part of your function can be smoothing that out, that's great. Or suggesting ways where we can kind of move things off or push them ahead, or with timing differences, you talk with the departments, it'll all come together, I'm sure. The other thing is, yes, I will have an updated capital plan. I'm this close. I just need DPW's numbers, which I've been waiting on. So once I get those, which I will remind the superintendent tomorrow that we're waiting on those. Once I get them, I could probably have it within a day or two. I can share with you guys, and we can have a totally current capital plan where you guys could be working off of. I think that would be good because it will have some changes in it. So we'll look forward to that. And if there's any follow-up questions, let me know.
So Brian, is it, just for everyone's benefit, it's fair to say that any capital that this committee brings forward, and let's just say ultimately the town approves, that's not in here right now, right? And likely if we were to bring forward a larger project, that's going to be similar to public safety building and the schools where we'd not only have a measure at town meeting, but we'd have a ballot measure. And you'd likely recommend that be exempted from the levy. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, so just a moment on that, a very quick moment. So when I got here in 2003, the town had I don't want to say a written policy, but they had an unofficial policy where, believe it or not, all their debt was exempted, was subject to ballot votes. There wasn't any debt that we had that was not exempted. That sort of changed over the years for various reasons, and there's philosophies on that of fitting your capital within your levy limit or not. The purpose of the exemption, which is, by the way, authorized by the state, they allow us to have this little legislative ability to exempt debt because they feel like large projects or bigger projects should be outside your normal operating limits. That's kind of the reasoning behind it, and it makes sense. So that's something else that the capital committee could probably, at least to some extent, weigh in on. But you're right, Jason. That is correct.
Okay, so to your comment on anything we can do to help smoothen it out, right? Just to make sure we kind of have our mission. We're not going to, obviously, it's advisory in the Board of Selectmen's job to look at the overall operations, right? Anything you can do to streamline expenses or generate additional revenue streams. Obviously, if we have ideas, we'll certainly float them, but to keep us on track in our meetings, right? Our focus is going to be, how to balance the capital within kind of all the other operational things that everyone else is battling, right? And given we have two advisors.
Correct. When you look at that plan, that, especially the new plan, when I send it, I think you'll be looking at a plan where you can make some really good, helpful suggestions on which departments can do some things. And some of the things that may be on that capital plan, I think you've mentioned this before, might be cohesive. Like Council on Aging might be doing a plan that may impact, I don't know, recreation or, some crazy other thing with their, because recreation's in a different building. So you can kind of build off of each other. I think maybe that's one of the pieces that might be missing right now. But yeah, when you look at that plan, I think the committee itself will be able to, make some good suggestions that what can we do in conjunction with one another and how can we time it to make it the most beneficial for the town.
Okay. I'll open it to the committee. Are there any questions on the 5-year levy capacity? We'll get to the capital plan in a second.
Brian, one question I have, do you have some number in your head that you think of to get it voted on separately for the debt exemption, like, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million? Is there a capital level where you would suggest having that vote?
Yeah, I mean, this is unofficial again, but I would probably suggest once you get to the million point, I think it's possibly an exemption issue. Possibly between the 500,000 and a million point.
Okay.
Couldn't sort of in the gray area there, but certainly by a million, I think it's best to kind of exempt some debt to give us because the problem is you start stuffing the capital, and this is why the DOR did this in the state. You start stuffing all these debt payments within the regular operating, levy capacity, and you're squeezing your departments now because, they have to, they were going to be requesting budgets, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on that with certain debt, expenses that have to be paid. So we just have to be careful of that.
Okay, so for the 5-year forecast, does that take into consideration any of those, like the roofs at schools or anything like that?
No, I have not. That's
Okay.
one thing I did not do. I did not put anything in the exempt. I did not assume any exempt debt going forward. That would make a difference. You're right. That would make an immediate difference. So, good point.
Okay, yep, thanks.
But to be clear, that solves your levy capacity issue, doesn't change your tax rate.
No,
Correct.
that's another good point.
But it
Which
solves our
Most
override.
people
issue.
don't really care about the levy, they care about what the tax rate is times the valuation, right?
Right.
I would think it's
and,
easier to
that's
pass capital issues than it is an override, though.
You're right. Mhm.
Brian, how much of this is historically, from a top line perspective, aspirational versus, actually will come to fruition? For example, 2.5% growth, all the other new growth in there. Does that typically pan out, or is this just the exercise we go through to determine that level?
No, it typically pans out. I think when you see the new 5-year schedule, you'll see a couple of areas that are more directly affected by the recent events that we're going to have to adjust, and that is local aid and local receipts. Local receipts, all local receipts is all our permits and fees and revenue we get from non-taxation. So it's basically excise tax, which everyone loves, paying their excise tax. That's the biggest component, but it's also investment income and all the fines and fees for the town, such as library fines, permits, transfer station stickers, blah, blah, blah. That area and local aid are the two areas that are going to be really impacted by, the recent unfortunate events. So those two areas, you'll definitely see a change. The other areas are pretty predictable.
Anything else, Jeff? Lisa, do you have any questions? Joe?
What's the SBAB payments?
So the SBAB payments go back 20 years to, they're all school-related building project
Yeah.
payments for Trotter and the tri-school renovations, Woodward. The state gave us about, I want to say 45% of a grant.
Yep.
And back then they used to pay it by year. This has changed now, actually. They don't do this anymore. They now pay it in a lump sum at the beginning of any project. However, in the old days, they used to give us a grant of 45%, whatever, and pay it every year annualized. So this is just the last few years of those projects that were 2000, 2001, 2002, they started right around there.
Sure.
So that's all that is.
Right. And the tax rate line that you're using, where it goes from 16.6 to 21.4. How is that calculated?
So that's just a calculation based on valuation, total town valuation divided by total expenses. And it takes out the excess levy capacity, as a balance. It's a very simple, fairly simple computation. Jason brings up a good point that I won't get too far into, but he's right that the next few years, there's a whole separate discussion of tax impact on people. That's separate from tax levy. You can still work within your tax levy and have a 10% tax increase. It seems weird, but you can. So that's something the board, the selectmen and the advisory committee are going to have to, opine on also as we go
Would
forward.
that have to go through a town vote to raise the tax rate?
It does not. No, it does not. As long as you're within the levy limit, that is, that can be passed at town meeting without any special conditions.
And I've heard Mark say it way too many times to me, right? The excess levy is what led to the AAA bond rating, like one of the key factors, right? Which lowers your borrowing costs. Is that still a fair statement, Mark?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, we talk about, affordability and the ability to pay, two very different things. We have the levy capacity, but, do people want to pay that level of tax increase? So I think that's obviously something that we need to look at in this whole exercise.
Brian, what's the certified free cash?
So the certified free cash, basically, on a simple computation, it's your balances at the end of the year. You've estimated a certain amount of revenue. If you come in above that revenue, it's that. And it's also all the departments, police, fires, town, school,
It's maintenance.
their ending budgets. If they have residual amounts, that goes into free cash.
Sure. Are all the increases in the insurance and the compensation and the benefits, are those percentages close to market value at the moment? Or are those based upon past performance? I know there were teacher increases and other things that were voted upon. How do those compare with market and what we voted on in the past?
Yeah, I basically did those I mostly used a 5-year average on a lot of that, thinking that it kind of took into account most of the, most of the differences and would give a fairly predictable amount, fairly predictable increase. That might be something I revisit with the updated 5-year plan. Like I said, I'm through parts of it, but not all of it. So the town administrator and myself will take another look at that, and we may have another tack on it, but that's a good point. But for now, it's basically based on historical data.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just looking at those and going, for 5 years going forward, if that's a continuing model, there's no way we can keep up with that.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are small potatoes, but some of them are.
Right.
So, all right. Good to know. Thanks.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to move on to capital plan unless someone stops me. All right, so as I mentioned, I also posted the latest copy of the capital plan from Brian. This is prior to the latest updates. It sounds like, Brian, based on your update, you're just waiting on the DPW superintendent, and then there'll be a new version.
Right.
I think two things kind of came to mind, as Brian and I were trying to pull all the documents together. One is, for those that don't know, he, as well as Tom and the town, have secured you got a grant, right, to pay for some new software that you'll be using in the treasurer's office, right, collectively between capital and like just budget planning, et cetera.
Correct. So we got a grant, right, it's specialized software to budgeting software. The town accountant, it's mostly the town accountant and my office will be using for next year.
Okay. So my understanding is that it's not close to being implemented yet. You don't know what exactly it's going to fully look like on the back end. But what I was thinking, and Brian, you can tell me if you changed your mind since we spoke, but I was planning to kind of chunk this schedule up a little bit into pretty much by facility, by department. So like take the schools, right? You have X number of schools, and have us start to list out the components so that we can think about, let's just say a new roof was put on a school 5 years ago. It's not going to show up on your capital plan, but it sure would be nice to know kind of what the major components are going to be over the next, 10, 20, 30 years, right? Because as we start to think through kind of what these facilities will look like and what facilities we may choose to part way with and what the facilities we decide to renovate or recommend renovating. I think it's important to have all those, because it really came to mind when I was talking to the police chief quickly, and he mentioned, well, we're already going to be due for radios in 8 years or 9 years, something like that, because put a new radio system in a public safety building, but those things only had 10-year lifespan. So everyone thinks, oh, you built a new public safety building, you're gonna, have everything now for 50 years and have no capital there. Well, there will be capital. So I was going to, with the committees, I was just gonna try to rejigger this mainly to help us in the conversations with these department heads as they come through it with us, just to maybe streamline and organize it. Just even like thinking about fire, how many apparatus do they have? Police, how many vehicles do they have? So once Brian gives me that new version, I was gonna just tinker around with it and see if we can't come up with a format that we all agree to and would welcome kind of the edits in terms of what we're comfortable working with, so that we can kind of go in front of a broader group and present it down the road. That makes sense.
I agree.
I guess, did anyone have any, we're not going to talk about specific projects tonight because we're going to wait for the department heads and I'll give an update on that, but anyone have any specific questions on how this is constructed? Obviously, there's going to be some tweaks coming, from DPW facilities, et cetera, but any questions just broadly for Brian, how he goes about this, what the process is, just so you can start to kind of get lay of the land for how we push this forward?
I had one question. There was a contingency for future capital facilities fund. I don't want to get into items, but I wasn't sure if that's like a vehicle to do something different. I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
Yeah, so this is something new that the last year or two, a few departments have started putting in. They're not sure what capital they want, but they think there's a contingency. There's been a few departments that have done that. So as an update, I'm glad you mentioned that. As an update, I just sent out a message to those few departments that that line is no longer going to be in the capital plan. So the new capital plan that you get will not have those contingency funds. It's real squishy. It's how much use is that to you? I mean,
None.
to me, it's not a whole lot either. So I said, unless you have something specific, you guys know what you need, and yeah, a contingency it's just not going to happen. So.
Great.
One of the things I will point out, and Jason could probably speak to this on a personal level, is you need to be careful about grants. There's a good side and there's a bad side. So, for example, the town got a grant of about $91,000 to help complete our the town's fiber lines connecting all of our buildings, which was a great thing because we're going to get it done in about 18 months rather than about 3 or 4 years with a little bit of funding going along. There's also grants that come out every so often that we're able to get a hold of, say, to replace all of the town's SCBA for the fire department. And normally there are certain things that you replace a little bit every year to kind of phase it as you go along. Maybe it's got a 10-year lifespan, so we'll replace pieces as we go along. If you get something that replaces it all at once, it's a great thing. However, it all needs to be replaced again at about the same time. And so that's one thing. I've seen that happen in a couple of communities I've been in where it's great. It's the panacea for a couple of years until it all comes due again. And then do you start looking to, do you put money away each year in anticipation of it? How do you want to, handle that? So it's just something to consider if in fact, Chief Achilles comes and says, hey, I got this grant for turnout gear. We're going to replace, 10 sets. Hey, police have got this grant and they're going to replace some radios. It's just something to keep in mind that you've got to have a plan to ensure that we can continue that, to do this on an annual basis or something like that, if it's a regular type of replacement plan, so that we don't get caught when everything expires all that same year.
Oh, that's a very good point, Mark. And I think one of the things that we should be, when we meet with each of the department heads, they should be assuming no grant funding, right? Because I think grants, we need to be applying for them. We need to be trying to get them. We shouldn't let the fear of what may happen 10 years down the road stop us from applying it, because I think anyone would take it once, even if you had to deal with it, the repercussions 10 years later. But I think when we talk to these department heads, we need to make sure they have everything in here and aren't presumptively assuming a certain grant is going to come through, right? You know, if it comes through, then it just helps this committee down the road, not hurt us because something wasn't in here. I think
Jason,
you're gonna hear a lot of that on the fire side is probably why you brought that up, Mark, right? I mean,
yeah,
fire has the most aggressive grant programs, but they're also one of the harder ones to get. You don't get them every year, and
right.
but they are big sums. When those come through, they're 6 figures or 7 even.
So one of the other things you could think about in trying to offset some of that, and I can't see Brian, I can't see all the blood rush to Brian's head because he's a little orange as it is, so maybe it's okay to say this. But one of the things we've talked about with the situation we're in now, potentially with the state cutting back on some of their local aid and maybe us having to readjust our local receipts in terms of the new normal, is that this town has never actually put money away for a rainy day. You know, we don't really have a rainy day fund. One time in 8 years have we actually put money into a rainy day fund since I've been here. The good news is that we haven't used any. So it's, you know, but it's still not a significant amount of money, $500,000-$600,000. It's really not helping us, you know, if we really needed it. If you want to take a look at maybe setting up a capital stabilization fund, there goes Brian's head. Okay. So, you know, I think that might be something to think about for the committee to recommend. We tried that one year. We said, you know, we're going to spend X amount of dollars every year on capital. And the years that we're under that amount, we will take that money and put that aside in stabilization, the rainy day fund, so that when the years that we go over that amount, we can then take that money and take it out of stabilization to help offset it. That kind of fell flat. The advisory committee at the time really wasn't interested in doing that. But a lot of things have changed. And I think that that's something this committee may want to think about doing, if not putting money into stabilization to offset some of those bigger years that may be coming for capital expenses, to set up a specific capital reserve fund, stabilization fund. And, you know, if you get to that point, we can, you know, Brian would be happy to walk us through that.
I think we can add it to a future agenda for consideration as part of this. I think we would need A, it to be on the agenda, but B, both of you to kind of come back with what your recommendation is, right? If you don't believe in it, then I don't know why we would even consider it unless this group really thought you two were off the beaten path, but you're bringing it up. So I got to believe you think there's some merit to it. So I would like to understand the pros and cons. It's just my personal view. And then we can bring it for vote here, and then we can go forward to advisory and BOS if that's something we really think is plausible moving forward.
Jason, my goal for the committee, the thing I think that would be great is that we or you develop a capital plan, you know, and a recommendation, and that recommendation and that plan on how to move forward is blessed by selectmen and advisory. So when we get to fiscal 22, let's say, there's no additional items, no new emergency things, nothing's been thrown into the plan. You have 1.4 million in capital that is on that plan for fiscal 22. That number is, everybody has already agreed upon that number comes into the budget. And I really think it would help to streamline the process to get everybody on board with something like that. And that's something we've tried to do, but again, I think, you know, it needs to be a fully vetted plan, and usually by the time we get into the budget process and trying to balance everything, and it's really not something that we've had the ability to really to hone in on. So that would be, you know, if I'm making a wish list, you know, I think if the committee develops that level of gravitas and can get the selectmen advisory on board, it would really, I think, help the process overall.
Okay. Are there any other questions on what's in the capital plan? Obviously, I'll send out a note when Brian updates it, and we'll try to chunk it out in advance of kind of the future meetings, because we will start having department heads on these discussions starting next meeting. I'll give an update on that. Any other questions on what's in there so far? All right. So what I have done since our last meeting is I reached out, and I'm just going to get my list so I do not forget who I spoke to and who I didn't, and who replied and who didn't. I reached out to the following departments: facilities, DPW, which also included the chair of the Public Works Planning Board, fire chief, police chief, IT department, including the Municipal Technology Committee, the library director, including the Library Board of Trustees, and the superintendent of schools and the school committee, and recreation and the recreation committee. And I need to still reach out to CPC, but that is going to be kind of later on in our process, so I didn't want to kind of jump ahead. I received replies from facilities, fire, police, IT, library, and recreation. Some I hadn't even pressed send and my cell phone rang on one department head. They're all very eager to come in and talk to us, which is good. They welcome the input. Some asked just some basic questions on what we're up to, et cetera. But all are very willing to come before us. In the reach out, I did give the fire chief in the schools kind of time based on what they're dealing with to come back to us. So I did hear from fire chief. I haven't heard back from schools. Obviously not going to push that one too hard, but we do need their input sooner rather than later. So I didn't want to just be presumptive and not send something, but I will let you know when I hear back from them. So where we have landed is at the next meeting, which I am hoping to do, I'm just gonna open my calendar so I don't mess up my dates. On Monday, April 27th, we'll have the facilities director, IT director, and recreation. As part of facilities, he'll touch briefly on some of the future items at the library if they're to stay in their current site. Many of you know there is larger discussions about what to do with that site given it's at the bottom of a hill that continually floods. I've asked the library director specifically that should be a separate topic in and of itself, that deserves kind of its own meeting, given that we could be looking at new construction and there's specific I'll call it state grants out there to fund a significant portion of that. So that would be the plan for the meeting of the 27th. And then if the committee was amenable to meeting the following Monday, so 2 Mondays in a row, then we'll have a little break. We would have police chief, who has a very light capital budget. We'd have both chiefs jointly for discussion of their radio, public safety radio infrastructure, which is a much larger item potentially. And then the fire chief, who has obviously a much more comprehensive capital plan. Chief Achilles, I gave him like 5 outs and he was very willing to still come on the 4th. So if those dates work for us, that's who has kind of committed to coming. Obviously, if that doesn't work for the committee, then we'll pick other dates, but that's kind of what we initially came up with. So that makes sense? Are there any objections to those dates? All right, so before we talk, so the more difficult part is time. There's a very, very strong preference, both from the various department heads, given some of the other competing priorities they have, to do those in the morning, like first thing. I know that's easier from a IT perspective to facilitate the meeting. And I did have a few committee members reach out in the meantime asking for a different time frame, if at all possible. But I think I remember, Joe, you specifically said evenings were ideal because of your situation, but I didn't remember. I just want to make sure I heard that right.
They're just better. We can do
They're
whatever.
better.
We're all at home. It's just better, but if it has to be, it has to be.
Jason, the only question is the one on the 4th. If the ban is lifted on the 4th and we're going back to actual working from locations, that might be an issue. But virtually, I could probably make during the mornings work.
Can we assume we'll be virtual then for now? And then if reassess it if the governor comes out with different guidance?
Yeah, that works.
All right. So what time, Lisa, did you have any preference?
No, I don't have a preference, but as a suggestion, just out of fairness to Joe, maybe we could do one in the morning and one at night, if that's amenable to everybody, kind of split the difference between the two. If it's just easier for one member to do it, I'm fairly flexible, but I totally understand that it may not be as flexible to others.
It's okay either way with me.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
I think what I can offer to hopefully split the difference is it was those specific departments that had requested.
Okay, fair enough.
But I would envision schools are not going to want to meet in the morning. They're going to want to be an evening meeting. Library had a preference for the evening as well. So I think it just happens the way that those two replied. And obviously I think they were assuming a virtual setting. So is 7:30, 8:30, what's the ideal time here?
I would say 7:30 works for me.
Fine.
Yeah, fine.
Brian, Mark, anything, any objection to that? Andrew, you good?
I'm-
No, I'm good.
Yeah,
All right.
7:30 or 8 is good.
All right, so those, for those two, and I know that would probably be better for Kathy, too, because I think she had a preference for the evenings as well, but say early morning. So those two we'll try to do in the morning, then we can reassess after there and try to balance it out. And obviously, we don't know what we're going to be heading directly for at this point. It's well taken. All right, so to make the most of those meetings, obviously, we'll have in front of us kind of what either the chiefs or department heads, depending on what they are, have kind of put forward as their capital plan. What I would ask is, once we see Brian's final plan for each department, I'll try to, everyone see my light just completely flicker behind me. Once we have that specific listing, if you have questions that you think they may need to dig up data on or have items ready, and you don't think that they would be able to speak to right off the bat, I would appreciate just send your questions. All I'm going to do is forward it to them so that they're prepared. I think that's going to lead to a more meaningful discussion as opposed to, I'm not a big fan of like gotcha moments like in settings like this. I think, you know, the more we can help to facilitate and have them come prepared, the better. My intention on the first go around is we can ask a lot of questions, but I don't think we should form opinions on whether they have it right until A, we've had time to deliberate, and B, we've had time to kind of put it all together, right? So the chief may have it perfect. I'll just pick on fire because it's easiest. The chief may have it perfect from a fire department only perspective, but it may not work in the grander town thing. So I want to I'll try to hopefully steer us in the direction of listening and then deliberating and then voting. And what I've told each department head is it's probably going to be maybe some more softball questions up front. And then the really tough questions are going to come when we try to combine this, and we would give them the option to come back. If, like, you know, we were taking a view that was maybe going to be inconsistent with what they were recommending, so that, you know, when this goes to advisory and BOS and ultimately the town, if we had a conflicting view, that there would be an explanation on both sides. Hopefully we'd be able to resolve any conflict, but inevitably the priorities of each department are not going to line up. I think we'd be living in a dream world, and that was even in a good economic environment. Any questions on that plan? Okay.
That's good. One thing, Brian, I don't know if it's possible, but on your next 5-year forecast update, would it be possible to exclude like just the items over like 1.5 mil and see what that does to our levy capacity? I think there's only 3 or 4 items in the next 5 years.
Yes, that shouldn't be a big issue.
All right, that might be good to see. Thanks.
All right, so that kind of tackled items 6 and 8 kind of combined on the agenda. So I'm going to go to item 7 because this did come up in the last meeting, and I purposely deferred conversation until Mark was here. So as you all remember, there is an oversight element to this committee as well. It's one of the final bullet points on our charge. And having kind of discussed originally with Brian and Mark when this committee kind of came to be reinvigorated, what that was meant to be. A lot of it came from at least my personal experience on the Public Safety Building Committee, in that the execution led to most of the savings versus luck led to some of the other savings that occurred there. But for example, if that committee in particular had not been working towards an aggressive timeline in terms of bid documents, we would have had a 30% steel tariff. We didn't pay a 30% steel tariff. If that committee hadn't kind of stood over like the owner's project manager, who technically was our representative, as well as architects and general contractors, we definitely would have gotten taken advantage of, just because that's the nature of public bidding, because we had to go with the lowest bidder. So if we are to see larger capital projects coming out of this committee, I thought it was equally as important that there be oversight, because you can't pitch an idea, sell it to people, and then have it kind of go belly up. So the way that the clause is written is that each year at town meeting, there are a bunch of capital items, right? And we could even look at what may be coming forth, whether it be spring, summer, fall, whenever we actually have a town meeting. And there may be two, right? Based on the latest thought process in terms of annual and then the special that was already planned essentially for the fall. That this committee would essentially form a view, but also the town administrator would form a view, and we'd go before the Board of Selectmen, and they would decide who has oversight of that project. The Board of Selectmen could decide it doesn't fall within a committee and they trust just the department head. They could ask the department head to work together with this committee, or I think in building instances, they tend to form separate building committees anyways, in which case this committee would have a voice on that to oversee it. So there's really nothing for us to do from an oversight perspective today, because Mark, unless I'm mistaken, there aren't really any current capital projects being undertaken at this point in time, right, in town, that are actually town funded.
Yeah, really not at this point.
So I think when there is, once we have a town meeting and once we know what gets approved, the charge reads that Mark makes the recommendation. I'm also open to this committee having discussion around that recommendation so that we can provide a view concurring with that recommendation, hopefully, to the Board of Selectmen, so that it becomes more of a consent item and not something that has to be openly hashed out. I think it's going to be abundantly clear, at least in my personal opinion, of which projects require oversight and which ones don't. I think there will inevitably be a question of, if you have a recreation project, what is Recreation Commission's role? What is potentially our role? If you have a CPC project, which some of those can be very large, right? What is CPC's responsibility? In my view is, even though it is their responsibility, how can this committee be of assistance to them? My last conversation with the CPC chair had nothing to do with Capital Committee. They have a tough time getting a quorum for a meeting, right? So I would hope that, if they're struggling to get members and there was another committee offering to help them kind of with oversight of certain things that they may not have the bandwidth to handle, that they would be open to that. But that would be part of what I would call the conversation we have with them down the road. They may still maintain all the official oversight, but again, thoughts and ideas that I think we should be thinking about as we start to review the capital plan, how you would then oversee it on the back end.
And I agree with you, Jason. I don't think that you would have, in my opinion, I wouldn't go to the Board of Selectmen until the committee and Brian and I were all on the same page. That doesn't make any sense. You know, nobody wants us to watch the sausage being made live. It doesn't do anybody any good. And I don't think it helps the credibility of the committee if we're sitting there and, you know, can't agree. I think that, you know, obviously the committee is the capital planning committee. And the planning piece means that we're doing the things up front, or you're doing the things up front to make sure that everything lines up correctly. I think, and Jason and I talked about this briefly, and Brian and I have talked about it offline, is that I think it makes sense for the committee when projects get, you know, when there's changes to projects, if bids come in too high and we need to figure out how to reduce the scope of a project, if bids come in well below revenue, and there's maybe some additional funds to add on some other things to the project. Maybe there was a couple of ad alternates, things that want to be considered, what makes sense. I think another set of eyes at those times really makes, makes sense. And just in all fairness, you know, Jason probably just on natural reaction brought up recreation first. That may be something that comes to mind when you think of capital projects that may not have gone the way that you kind of wanted them to. I think a lot of that was, some of the people that may have been in place at the time with those projects. I think that, and Brian Ballantyne could comment on this if he wanted to, but I think we have people who are more well suited for handling some of those projects. A lot of the projects now, you're bringing in consultants, you're bringing in engineers to help you with even smaller scale things like fields, some of the horizontal projects. So it's been much better, but I do think that there will be some opportunity for oversight, of obviously some projects. And if we're doing something like undertaking a library renovation, a major renovation where we're looking at a library grant from the state, then yes, I think that the trustees probably are going to set up a building committee where I think there would be some, some opportunities for membership from this committee, and there'd be a separate building committee put together.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, Mark is right. I won't belabor the point, but 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the Recreation Commission had a very ambitious plan for multiple fields that was put out there. I think it was way above their heads, to be honest. They were juggling a lot of things and some very major projects. That's actually been scaled back and broken up a little bit since then, but at that time, I would have loved a committee like this to sort of be a shepherd to help them, because as Mark knows, that was, I think we both saw the tea leaves there that it was just a problem. So if we do get into those type of projects or departments that have a lot going on and juggling things at once, I'm absolutely all for this committee to try to kind of, help them and assist them and kind of laying out a more, a more realistic plan to get everything done. So that's all I have to comment on that.
And I think one thing that everyone should be aware of is any project greater than 1.5 million requires an owner's project manager. One thing I could foresee this committee once we get through kind of some of these initial steps, we may decide to pursue kind of combining engineering and owner's project manager type services. Instead of having each committee or each board or each department hire their own subcontractor within kind of the procurement roles. That was one of the things as we were vetting owner's project managers in the public safety building, we heard is when we were calling references, they're like, oh, we've worked with this company for 20 years because they oversee all our capital projects and they're just on a retainer sort of thing. And, town council, other things you have on retainer, right? Like this may be something instead of paying 10,000 here, 15,000 here, kind of have the same firm that comes to know you. I mean, Mark can probably speak to this from his daily walks down the street for 2 years, but right, Mark standing over their shoulder, a town committee standing over their shoulder really keeps everyone on their toes, and they also get to know you. They know which things are going to really kind of irk you and which things are really going to be okay if presented in the right way, and how to kind of thread that needle the right way. Because I think one of the things you'll find with some of these projects, and I think back to that 2017 town meeting where the most contentious part of the public safety building was the contingency, that there was 2 million of contingency, right? And the way we got people comfortable with it was that there would be proper oversight. We're going to have that battle on anything that's brought forward going forward. Someone's going to say the budget's just a little too fat, right? So I think not only maybe the budget's approved, but how do you kind of trim the fat as you go to keep it as lean as possible and take advantage where you can of cost savings. Are there any other questions or comments on that topic?
I'd just say, Jason, one thing too is for anything that's maybe say smaller or more than we want to take on, we can also leverage on the powers and duties of advisory to kind of handle some of that oversight on projects that are underway. We don't really do today, but I think, and Brian, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it isn't within their power and purview to do that kind of auditing or controls for those projects.
Yes, since Brian's not going to move, I'll jump in. I wouldn't, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't give advisory that. I don't think, there's been various levels of what advisory can and can't do or shouldn't do. I mean, the advisory should be focusing on the finances. And I know that there's been opportunities and our people have decided to try to expand that authority over the years. Taking oversight over projects and everything, and that is not one of them. So I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
You did well.
There anything else on oversight, Joe? I know you had questions on that last meeting. Did that answer the question on that piece of it?
I'm not sure what the question was in the last meeting, but I was asking.
Okay. No, I know you had asked to discuss it, so I made a note to add it to this agenda because I purposely punted it down the road and I thought it was important for him to be able to weigh in.
I'll admit that I'm willing to grab authority where there's a vacuum. So unless somebody pulls back, so I guess when we hit a wall, we hit a wall, and I'm not that worried about it.
Okay. No, so I think the first test will come whenever we actually get to have an annual town meeting. Looking at that list, I don't think it's a very long list. And either deciding there's nothing on it that requires oversight, or meeting with Mark and saying we really think something like this should have an extra set of eyes on it, and that'll be a good test. There's obviously no massive building project or anything like that in there. They're smaller items, either whether it be the annual or special in the fall.
Like Jason, I might want your oversight on the purchase of the fire engine. Make sure Chief Kelly buys the right one.
That's an interesting topic, because I'm a firm believer, this is a personal opinion, and I've prepped Chief Achilles pretty well for this discussion, that we need to understand the phasing of how he's going to replace things, because fire engines last 20 to 30 years. They don't last 5 years. But one of the things I thought the Public Safety Building Committee did really well is there are certain things we weren't experts in. I'm not a vehicle expert, and I would never tell a chief what equipment to buy. I would tell him whether his pricing is in the middle, too high or too low. Just like we all have automobiles, right? There's top end, middle end, low end. They do that for fire trucks too, right? Yep. So understanding what the needs are and how you can combine them, I think that's kind of where I would stop. Personally, would be my vote. I would never vote that this committee oversee which manufacturer the chief goes to.
Agreed.
Like
Yeah. Just making sure there's not a gold encrusted steering wheel or something.
Yeah, there will always be something that someone doesn't agree with, on everything we do, right? But I think as long as Chief Paulus usually says it best, right? He doesn't spend the money like he wouldn't spend his own.
Correct.
All right. So anyone have anything else or any comments on just kind of direction of where we're going before I make a motion to adjourn? Okay.
Are we meeting with facilities?
Yeah, he'll be in that April 27th meeting.
27th, okay.
So John Parent will walk through each of the buildings other than school. Obviously, something like Townhouse, South Union, that in Corderville Hall are going to take maybe a few minutes. Public safety is probably going to be a very quick conversation of you have 10 years until you have to think about anything, sort of thing. And then we also will have recreation that day.
Great.
All right, then I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second,
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, Malinowski, aye.
Brascio, aye.
Homer, aye.
Staff eye.
See, we're moving
All
towards
right,
the good
Hark,
button.
Hark guy.
All right, have a good evening, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank you, Mark and
night.
Brian.
Bye.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.